Hello everyone, my name is Daniel, and today I'm going to make a case for a Shavuot Rapture, and this is based on an endpoint on Second Passover. So I'm also going to review the case for the Second Passover and do a quick review of the entire season. So even if you haven't seen any of my other videos, you can get caught up about why Shavuot is where it is, why the calendar is what I think it is. So I'm going to do that real quick. But Shavuot is when the Ten Commandments were given, or rather Moses went up the mountain to get to the Ten Commandments, and I think that could be a fitting time for the rapture, and I'm going to explain why. All right, so we are rapidly approaching the most dreaded day in all of history. Right? There's never going to be a day worse than this in the past or ever again. Right? And it's going to kick off the tribulation with sudden destruction. So let's go through some evidence. And like I said earlier, finally joining God in Minutes Club on a Shavuot Rapture. But of course, I think he has mapped to the wrong Gregorian day, so don't be too disappointed if his date passes without event. In this post, I will show you how I understand Shavuot with ample documentation. All right, let's start with the mile-high view of there are 7,000 years of creation with a day as 1,000 years, right? That's how Scripture did. So the day with the Lord is as 1,000 years. And based on that understanding, we are currently around the year 6,000. I think that it's very possible that the millennial reign could start this year, because when he raptures us, he is our king. So the year of the rapture is the start of the millennial reign, in my opinion. I know a lot of people have given me flack that, hey, he's not here yet, the reign hasn't started. I agree. It hasn't quite started yet, but when Babylon falls and the kingdoms of this earth have become his kingdom and we are raptured up and he is our king, that is the start of his reign over us. And then from there, he goes and conquers the world. And that's what the tribulation is. At the end of the tribulation, he has completed his conquering. Of course, who is he conquering with? He's conquering with us. He comes with us to conquer. This is no different than what happened when they entered the promised land. They spent 40 years in the wilderness, followed by 6 years of war. And that 6 years of war is similar to the tribulation. So I think that the tribulation will probably be about 6 years. I don't know how the 7th year is going to work in that case, but we'll see. Anyway, that's the big picture. And then you can narrow it down with understanding Daniel 9:24. Rock Island Books recently affirmed this understanding of Daniel 9:24, where it's typically translated as 70 weeks, where NIV puts weeks in single quotes, because in the original Hebrew without vowel points, it could read 70-70. So it says 70-70 were divided or distributed among your people and the holy city to close the transgression, to seal up sins, expiate iniquity, and to bring in eternal justice, to seal up the vision and prophecy, or complete the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Holy of Holies. All those things did not happen in 490 years. And all those things will not happen even with the theory that you had 69 weeks and then a 70th week at some other point distributed in time. Even then, I think all of vision and prophecy goes to the end of the millennial reign, and that all those things cannot be completed until that time. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of Daniel's 70th week. In part, if you think about it, from the time of Ezra's decree, 490 years takes you to the year of the cross. So we've already had his 70th week, if you count it by that metric. And up until after the cross, everyone thought there was going to be 490 consecutive weeks. This whole concept of 69 and the 70th week separated is a late invention used to explain why things didn't happen when we thought. So with the understanding of 70, or 4,900 years, are determined upon thy people, and if we understand his people to be the seed of Abraham, and the seed of Abraham starts with the covenant or the promise of a child to Abraham, potentially starting with his birth, but I would say starting with the promise. And of course, Galatians, Paul tells us that the promises were made to Abraham 430 years before the law. And we know that the law came when 40 years before they crossed the Jordan River. And we know that that was 480 years minus 40 from the time Solomon started laying the temple, foundation of the temple. And we have lots of secular sources that confirm the date of the start of the temple. So we know with high degree of confidence that the promises were made to Abraham 3,900 years ago, which means we have another 1,000 years divided upon thy people in which to complete these things. And that this year is the 70th Jubilee from crossing the Jordan River and the start of the last 1,000 years of 4,900 years from the Abraham covenant. There's no denying that. Whether that aligns perfectly with the millennial reign and the little season for Satan at the end, I don't know. There's a couple of years in the 7,000-year timeline that doesn't add up. 53 unaccounted years at the beginning, some unaccounted years at the end, and Rock Island Books has a theory about 144 jubilees and tries to expand upon it. I think there's not a lot of evidence for or against all that. It's a reasonable theory. But anyway, this is the big picture that shows that we are right here. We are also exactly 490 years from a second decree to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So just like Ezra gave a decree until Messiah came, now another 490 years until the prince comes, right? Yeshua is coming as a conquering king. So I've covered all this in the past, but that's how we know we're in the right season. We expect the day of the Lord on a Jubilee year. This is a Jubilee year. If it's not this year, then we got to wait another 49 years, and that's a big problem. All right. So I've covered all of that. So let's talk about Second Passover and the full moon calendar. So I've made the case for Second Passover, but of course, before I review that, let's make the case for the full moon, because that's the difference between my understanding of the calendar and most other prophecy teachers out there are using the traditional, either the dark moon or the sliver moon, understanding of the calendar or a solar calendar, right? So there's lots of different calendar theories on there, and I'm the primary one investigating the consequences of a full moon calendar in my interpretation. And Second Passover has passed. We're in the middle of Second Unleavened Bread right now. And so there's some possibility that the Atzeret of Second Passover is still on the table at the end of this week, around June 2nd. But for reasons I'm going to explain in this video, I think it might actually move to Shavuot. So I'm going to update my projections. It could happen earlier, but I'm going to update it to Shavuot before that day even gets here. Because I try to go where the evidence leads. And if I'm wrong, then of course that just means process of elimination. We go back and we study some more and try to figure out what it's saying. So let's talk about the full moon for a second. I'm going to go real quick. This is not going to be overloading you guys. And Yah said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and days and years. And Yah made two great lights, the great light to rule of the day and the small light to rule with the night and the stars. So two great lights, the sun and the moon, right? A dark moon and a sliver moon are not a great light. And they have authority to, right? Rule is another way of saying have authority. What's their authority in? For signs and seasons and days and years. So with that authority, we know that the sun has authority in the day, and the moon only has authority at night with the stars. If the sun is out and blocking the stars, the moon does not have authority. So the dark moon is not a light. It cannot be a sign. It is not visible. And there's 3 nights every month where we can't see the moon at all. And so it's a very ambiguous sign by observation alone. You have to calculate it. And of course, the first visible crescent is only visible when you still have the sun on the horizon. The day's not over yet. It's not nighttime and the stars are not visible. So the sun still has authority. That sliver moon has no authority. And that's the root of my understanding of what the valid signs are. But there's another ancient document similar to the book of Proverbs and thought to be written around 200 BC. It was widely included in the Greek Septuagint as scripture and used by early Christian communities. So most Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches consider this to be scripture, and many church fathers also agreed. So it says, from the moon is the sign of the feast, a light that decreases in her fullness. Sirach or Ecclesiasticus 43:7. So this is just the Strongs for the some of the key words here, the moon and fullness. So people, myself included, are experts at twisting the meaning of any passage by redefining the context. And many do this without malice, but due entirely to cognitive biases that everyone is subject to, myself included. And it takes great effort to overcome these biases. Right? You have confirmation bias, where you see what confirms what you already believe. You have the bias of the first thing you're exposed to. So if you were exposed to a continuous weekly cycle, you're going to be biased toward that, even though if you were exposed to a different way first, it might not have the same influence over you. So there's all these biases that impact us, and we have to work very hard to overcome them if we want to be rational. So these biases especially kick in when you have cognitive dissonance, and when a new view would entirely overturn your existing worldview. So long as there's at least a plausible interpretation that is compatible with your current worldview, that is the interpretation that people tend to cling to. So keep that in mind as you consider what I'm saying about the full moon, is that you have first exposure to the dark sliver moon. Everyone else is doing it. There's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of tradition. But you have to go where the evidence leads us. So, people can dispute the meaning of these words all day. But ancient Chinese documents, where they record all the eclipses and other things going on in the sky, they document a dramatic solar eclipse at the time of the cross with a note that says, a man from heaven died to pardon all, or something along those lines. All are pardoned under heaven. Now, that occurred on the last day of the month, is when they recorded it, on a month that started with a dark moon. Of course, solar eclipses is how they recorded it, can only happen on a dark moon. So if this was the event of the cross at Passover, then this must mean that the biblical month started on a full moon. So even secular sources consider these Chinese records to be highly reliable. That said, people have a way of twisting those records to try to reinterpret the text so that there's nothing supernatural. It's not referring to the cross. There's various other ways that people try to dismiss that fantastic recording. Remember, those people in China had no bias from the Jews. They had no bias of all that history. They're just recording what they saw in a message, and it got recorded in the logs and forgotten about. So every argument against the full moon that I have seen is based on one of the following. It's either a circular argument that everybody knows that Passover is on a full moon, therefore it must start. Right? I've seen that over and over again. I do watch all these videos trying to prove a sliver or dark moon from Scripture. And it always comes back to an assumption that Passover is on the full moon. But that assumption is derived from your assumption of when the month starts. Or they will quote the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jubilees, which many people also use to justify a solar calendar. I don't consider those sources to be Scripture. Historian Philo and Josephus seem to use a dark moon. In my opinion, all of these works document Babylonian traditions. And ironically, people will pick and choose Philo documents because Philo documents a lunar Sabbath. Jubilees documents a 49-year Jubilee cycle, and many people still go with the 50-year cycle. And the Book of Enoch can be interpreted to imply that Enoch was the Messiah, or will fulfill that role in some way. And people say Enoch supports a solar calendar in combination with Jubilees, and other people say a lunar. So you've got these two books here, which have all these conflicting interpretations, and people kind of take what they want from there and leave the rest. So I call this the fallacy of cherry picking. And then, of course, the final circular argument is that new moon means the scientific new moon, which is simply an appeal to tradition and the traditions of men. And that's what we were warned against. New moon simply means the phase of the moon that starts the month. But different cultures at different times use the dark moon, the first sliver, the last sliver, and the full moon phase as the sign of the start of the month. So you need to find texts that describe what the new moon looked like, not just something that says new moon. So based on my understanding of the authority from Genesis, confirmation from Ecclesiasticus, there are other scriptures. I just did a high-level overview here. And the Chinese records that confirm that that's when this went down. And the fact that no one recorded an eclipse or the dark eclipse of the cross on the same day as a full moon, right? Astronomers know that those two things can't happen at the same time. It'd be very noteworthy. We have lots of sources that documented the darkness, the supernatural darkness. I'm not saying that the darkness was just an eclipse, but it occurred at a time of month where the eclipse was possible. And so that also adds further confirmation. All right. All that said, this is what the second month, the month we are currently in, looks like. And we've passed the day that the flood started, the 17th of the second month. And we are moving toward June 2nd, which is the Atzeret of Second Passover. So you might want to pay attention to that date. It happens to be Israel's 77th birthday and the 153rd Gregorian day of the year. So it's got a lot of interesting things that happen to align with that particular day. The 153 represents the 153 fish that were caught in the net, and the net did not break. And people believe those are the rapture fish. Those are that number of 153 is symbolic in some way that lots of people have tried to figure out. So that's coming up. And then June 7th is 40 days from the resurrection. So He'll come back just as he left. He's going to come back at the same time that he left. You could speculate that there might be some kind of connection there. I don't particularly think that that's what's going to happen, but I mark it in on the calendar because part of doing this is to understand Scripture better and the patterns of history, because history is there to teach us about the future. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything repeats in cycles, and we get to know Him more as we investigate these things. And as we see all the connections in the Scripture, we get to understand and appreciate His Word. Would we be studying out 40 days from the resurrection and all the different calendars and feast days if we weren't watching as we were commanded? So even if we're wrong about our conclusion, that doesn't mean that we didn't learn anything along the way that was valuable. So that's the second month, and that's going to end around June 11th. But before we get there, let's talk about the Atzeret of Second Passover. The Atzeret is the 8th day of any feast. It's often referred to as the last day. And I put a lot of evidence on the Atzeret of Tabernacles in my October 9th projections. But ultimately, all this evidence can point to the Atzeret of first or second Passover, and potentially the Atzeret of Hanukkah, which was documented as a kind of second Tabernacles. So I've got this video here where I talk a lot about it. There's some other videos I've talked about the Atzeret. But a lot of very significant things about being raised up on the 8th day and when Yeshua was speaking on the 8th day. I was pretty convinced that the rapture is likely on an Atzeret, which means we don't want to rule out June 2nd, but if June 2nd comes and goes, then we need to consider other things. So, one thing we have to consider with the rapture and the sudden destruction is I believe that the sudden destruction starts the 1,260 days of the sun being clothed in darkness or clouds, nuclear winter. And so we have to see, well, where does that put the midpoint? Where does that put the end of the tribulation? Do those fall on appointed times if you have the Atzeret? So, we have the start of the flood. This is past, but it would have ended up around Passover Atzeret 2032 if you allow a little bit of overlap between the first 1,260 days and the last 1,260 days. And my theory for the overlap is the two witnesses die and the people flee into the wilderness, and he starts taking care of them from that point. But their witness isn't over until they resurrect 3.5 days later, because the whole world sees it and marvels. So if you have at least a 3.5 day overlap, then the 25th of the first month back 3.5 days takes you to the Atzeret of Passover. Of course, this has passed, so we can move on. The Atzeret of second Passover takes you to the 29th. You'd have to have a whole 7 days of overlap. So Jerusalem gets surrounded by armies. Everyone flees. Maybe you have the desolation of the abomination, which is the Dome of the Rock. And then 3.5 days later, the two witnesses are killed. And then, so there's some room there for a 7 day overlap as well, which would, of course, cause the end of the tribulation to fall on the Atzeret of Passover 2032, if things go down on June 2nd. The Ascension Resurrection, 40 days from the resurrection, does not line up. Fourth day of the second month. Second month, fourth day. That is not an appointed time at the end. There's no appointed time at the midpoint. So I just don't see that lining up. The next events on the calendar is in the third month, approaching Shavuot. We have when the commands were spoken on Mount Sinai, and the people were afraid, and there was lightnings and thunderings and all the same symbols of Revelation. And that would be on June 17th. And if you go 7 years later, you end up on Second Passover. And of course, Shavuot will land you on the Atzeret of Second Passover, assuming you have some overlap. So I think somewhere between the commands being spoken and Shavuot is the prime candidate. And if all that fails, we have Pentecost, new wine, 7 weeks later. But once again, the midpoint and the end don't line up on an appointed time. So we expect some connection to Second Passover in his second coming, because he's a man on a long journey. Second Passover was created for a man on a long journey. So I think, based on this, that if it doesn't start on Second Passover, right, this week, then it has to end on Second Passover. Otherwise, the Second Passover connection is harder to understand at this point. So that's why I'm looking heavily at Shavuot. So what's missing in all of this is any alignment with the fall feasts. I don't know how to explain that, but we have a real challenge with the fall feast. Most people, I would estimate 60-70% of people believe, maybe more than that, believe the Jubilee year starts in the fall, goes fall to fall. And if that's the case, excuse me, if that's the case, then the Jubilee ends before we even get to the fall feast this year. So if something's going on with the fall feast, maybe it's a 7.5-year tribulation. It took Solomon 7.5 years to build the temple. Maybe the last 6 to 7 months is cleaning up for the fall feasts. So there's lots of things going on there where we're just going to have to wait and find out what his plan is, because the scriptures are light on details. So let's talk about the 42 months versus 1,260 days for a second. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. So are those 42 months the first half or last half of the tribulation? We're also told to exclude the outer court, do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample the holy city for 42 months, and I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. I think it's the days that are clothed in sackcloth, not the witnesses, because the sun is dark as sackcloth. So 42 months, 1,260 days. There's a little mismatch here going by a lunar calendar, in that inclusive counting, you get 43 months with 1,260 days, or potentially 44 months, depending upon when in the month you start. So, unless there's some major changes in the rotation of the speed of the Earth or the orbit of the moon, we can conclude that these 42 months of the Antichrist rule must start after the 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. So sudden destruction, and then within the first month of that, the Antichrist comes on the scene and helps rebuild the world. I think it takes a couple of weeks. People hide in their caves and their shelters, and then he comes on the scene. So let's go on to ending on Second Passover. So if we don't start on Second Passover, then we can end on Second Passover. And so that means that if we end on Second Passover, we start around Shavuot. So let's look at Shavuot. So here's the third month, and I've marked key dates in history on this month. They arrived at Mount Sinai on the third day of the third month, and then they were told they had 3 days to prepare. They're going to wash their clothes on the first 2 days, and on the third day, that he's going to speak to them. And that third day was the 6th day of the month, and we know that because the book of Jasher, also not scripture, but it is got more historical dates, the best evidence we have. So it also appears to align with the biblical account. So we're going to go with that. He spoke to them. The people were afraid. They asked, hey, Moses, you just talk to Yah and tell us. Moses was given the commandments. He wrote them down. And then he read them to the people. And all the people said, we will keep your commandments. And that was sort of the wedding. And then there was, the mountain was covered in clouds for 6 days. And on the 7th day, the Lord spoke to Moses and said, come up here and I'll give you 2 stone tablets with the laws written on them. So he then ascends the mountain. And the day that he would ascend the mountain to go get the 2 stone tablets is the 16th of the third month, which is 7 complete Sabbaths after. And then, of course, 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain start then. So that's the rough timeline. And so traditional Feast of Weeks, according to the creatorscalendar.com, which is where I got these calendars from, it would be on June 20th. I think that's a mistake. I think that's the wrong date. And I'm going to show you why. So, given this, spoken commands June 17th, Shavuot June 27th, and Second Passover at Atzeret is the end in 2032. Now, counting to Shavuot is fraught with controversy because it depends upon defining first fruits, defining a complete Sabbath, Saturday versus lunar Sabbath theories. In other words, you can only find Shavuot if you get all those things correct. So let's look at what our sources tell us. On the second day of unleavened bread, that is the 16th day, our people partake of the crops that they have reaped, which they have not touched before, esteeming the right to honor Yah first out of the gifts of the earth which he has given them. They offer the first fruits of barley in this manner. So that's Josephus, which aligns with what the Septuagint says. And he shall lift up the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you on the morrow of the first day of unleavened bread. So the day after the first day of unleavened bread, in other words, the second day of unleavened bread, the priest shall lift it up. Unleavened bread is on the 15th, the second day is on the 16th, which agrees with what Josephus says. So once you can accept that the 16th is always first fruits and not the first Sunday after unleavened bread, which is the other way of doing it, and you understand that 30 AD is impossible for the cross because 29 AD was the Sabbath year, and he spoke in Nazareth on the Day of Atonement that year, and he couldn't die 6 months later. Once you have those two facts, and you know that there are 8+ verses that say that he rose on the third day, not the 4th or the 5th or the 6th day, and you know that the last Passover of the 70 weeks or 490 years from Ezra's decree was 32 AD, there is no longer any other explanation except a lunar Sabbath that can account for all these facts. So the lunar Sabbath is not just a modern invention or a modern false teaching. It's something that was documented by Philo, who was alive at the time of Yeshua. So it goes all the way back there and further. There's other evidence. So just to show you that there, just because there was a calendar at that time, right, doesn't mean that was the only calendar. Like today, people had many calendars back then. We had the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. We had the Book of Jubilees calendar, the Enoch calendar, and variations on all the calendars. So this calendar dispute has been around for a long time. You have the Julian calendar. At the time, the Julian calendar started the week with Saturday instead of ending with Saturday. So there's lots of calendar disputes. So I just want to show you that a lunar Sabbath idea goes back that far. Not to say that I agree with everything Philo says, and to say I'm not cherry picking, because I'm only using the evidence to demonstrate that it existed, not that everything Philo says is true. So the number 7 is of great power, not only in the creation of the world, where Yah rested on the 7th day, but also in the revolutions of the moon, which completes its phases in periods akin to 7 days. For the moon, from its new appearance to its half, from its half to its full, and back again, he appears to start with the darker sliver moon, measures time in segments that honor the sacred 7. And this is reflected in the weeks and the festivals of our people. So the phases of the moon are connected to the weeks and festivals of the people. Just to continue here, the number 7 is the festival number, for the Sabbath is the 7th day, and the greatest of the festivals are measured by 7s, both in their duration and their intervals. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread extends over 7 days, a period of perfection, and is followed by counting 7 weeks to the Feast of First Fruits of Wheat, Shavuot, showing the divine harmony of time. So here, Philo is saying you have a week of unleavened bread followed by 7 weeks to Shavuot. And that's my understanding as well. You also see that the 7th day is the Sabbath day, and the greatest festivals are measured in their intervals. So you have their duration, they're 7 days long, and their interval, their day of the month, are measured in 7s. And to confirm this, he also says, but the 7th day of the week, he has assigned the greatest of festivals, Passover and Tabernacles, those of longest duration at periods of the equinox and both the vernal and autumn each year. So he's saying Passover and Tabernacles are on the 7th day of the week, or the first day of unleavened bread and Tabernacles. So those are the greatest of the feasts, always the 7th day of the week. That only happens on a lunar Sabbath. And it's possible for it to be, I suspect it's impossible to have it occur such that Passover is sometimes on the 7th day and Tabernacles is lined on the 7th day if you're going with Saturday. I think because it shifts throughout the months, that the 6 months apart are going to be off by a day. So if Passover lands on aligns with Saturday on the first day of unleavened bread, first day of Tabernacles will not align on it. So this right here is strong evidence from Philo of a lunar Sabbath calendar being described. And of course, he counts 7 complete Sabbaths from the end of unleavened bread, which is different than how most people count. Most people count from the 16th, or the first Sunday after Passover. That's when most people count from. But Philo is documenting that you count after unleavened bread. Now, so let's see how we can confirm this from Jubilees. Also not scripture. And it came to pass in the first year of the AM, the exodus of the children out of Egypt, in the 3rd month, in the 16th day of the month, that Yah spoke to Moses, saying, "Come up to me on the mount, and I will give you 2 tablets of stone of the law and the commandment, which I have written, that you may teach them." So the book of Jubilees establishes that as the 16th day of the 3rd month. Deuteronomy says, 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a solemn assembly. To the Lord your God you shall do no work on it. All right, so I bring this up because the solemn assembly is on the 7th day of unleavened bread, and we're going to see that here in a second with another quote of Philo. You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath. Sabbath can refer to a period of a week, right? You have a Sabbath of years. It's another way of referring to 7 days. So from the day after the Sabbath week, starting the day you brought the sheaf wave offering, which would be the 16th. So from the day after that week, 7 full or complete weeks shall be completed. So you have the first, the waving of the barley. That week's not a complete week. You have to go until the end of unleavened bread and then count 7 complete weeks. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread extends over 7 days, a period of perfection, and is followed by counting 7 weeks. And here's another thing. The solemn assembly, which is the 7th day of unleavened bread, belonging to the festival of the sheaf. So that first fruits, the atzeret of that, is the prelude to another festival of greater importance, for from this day, the 50th, or Pentecost, is calculated. And how do you calculate it? By counting 7 times 7 weeks. So you're counting in units of week, and then you go to the next day. A most holy and most suitable day for the offering of thanksgiving to Yah. So if you count 7 complete Sabbath weeks after unleavened bread, and then go to the next day, you end up on the 16th of the 3rd month, the very day Moses went up the mountain to get to the stone tablets. He ascended, the day we will ascend. So just to show you, I got the first month here. You have first fruits of barley, unleavened bread here. Here's the atzeret. And then Thomas, is doubting Thomas, appeared here on the first day. And this is the first week here. So week 1 ends the first complete Sabbath on the 29th of the first month. And then you get the second month, and you get the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th. Then you go to the 3rd month, and you get the 7th complete week here. The 5th, the 6th here, and then the 7th here, the 7th and the star there. And then you end up with the 16th, the day he goes up the mountain. So in the 3rd month, on the 16th day of the month, God spake to Moses, saying, "Come up to me on the mount, and I will give you 2 tables of stone, the law and the commandment." So what are we supposed to do in Shavuot? From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves made with 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour, baked with yeast, as a wave offering of first fruits to Yahuwah. So these 2 loaves are thought to represent either the 2 tablets or the 2 houses of Israel, or the southern tribes, maybe both. Now consider Ezekiel 11:19. "I will remove from them their heart of stone," referring to the stone tablets, perhaps, "and give them a heart of flesh, so that they may follow my statutes and keep my ordinances and practice them." So when we are raptured, we're going to be given a new heart, and he's going to write his law on our heart. When did he write the law on stone? At Mount Sinai. It would be fitting to write the law on our heart on the self-same day. So this is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time. Well, when did he make the first covenant? He made the first covenant when the people heard all the commandments and said, "I will follow them." So he will establish a new covenant. And what's he going to do? He's going to put my law in their minds and write them on their hearts. I'll be my God, and they will be my people. So here we have Shavuot being the Ten Commandments, where he's getting the 2 tablets. And on that day, we're supposed to wave 2 loaves of bread made with leaven. All the other feasts, it's unleavened bread, right? Leaven tends to represent sin. Well, we are bread, we're full of sin. We've been spread throughout the world. And on that day, he's going to lift us up, I think. And he's going to, it's a fitting analogy in my opinion. So this is wheat, and the parable of wheat and tares also aligns with the wheat harvest, Shavuot. The wheat is taken to the barn, or his tent, or his tabernacle to hide a while, and the tares are burned with fire. So that parable does point to Shavuot. So with this understanding, the Shavuot Rapture on June 27th would align with Second Passover at the end of the tribulation, being the last day. But, we have a puzzle piece, and there's always something that doesn't quite fit. The Shavuot Rapture, sudden destruction, does not align with any dates in the timeline of the flood that I've found so far, except potentially ending about the same time the flood ended, around the 27th of the second month of 2032. So if you ignore the tradition of months being rotated by 6 months from creation, right? So typical days of flood, they assume that the months there are starting from the fall instead of from Nisan, or the first month in the spring. But so you have to ignore that and just go to the second day, or 27th day of the second month. Maybe there's a slight connection to the days of Noah. If you can find more, please let me know. We had to understand the days of Lot, where Lot made a feast with unleavened bread for the 2 angels before he was taken out. Well, if we're not, if it ends on Second Passover, we still have some connection there, but it's no longer connected to the sudden destruction at the beginning. Now, we do have Apophis arriving at Passover in 2029, and that could be like the destruction of Sodom. So there might be other events in the middle of the tribulation that align with the days of Lot, where we just don't have the details. But in hindsight, we'll see the connection. So I already addressed the fall feast briefly. But, the vast majority of people believe the Jubilee year starts in the fall. So if that's the case, we're not going to make it to the fall feast if the sudden destruction is going to occur in the Jubilee year. Because the Jubilee year will end before Feast of Trumpets. So if I'm wrong about Shavuot, then all that remains is 9th of Av, which happens to be exactly 7 complete Sabbaths after Shavuot, which in turn is 7 complete Sabbaths before Feast of Trumpets. And when you look at the scriptures, I'm not going to bring it up here, but it says, "You shall appear before me 3 times a year." Right after it talks about first fruits. And the first time with Shavuot, with the wheat, and then at the end, the harvest of the ingathering. People normally think that it's Passover and Tabernacles and Shavuot, but I think it's actually 3 first fruits, each 7 complete Sabbaths apart. You number 7 complete Sabbaths, then you count 50 days. So that said, I don't agree with the majority. I do believe that the Jubilee year goes from spring to spring, and therefore we have until spring 2026 before Passover for things to go down on the Jubilee year. And if things don't go down this year at all, then will be very confused and have to reconsider a whole lot of things. So by process of elimination, it looks like June 27th is a time to pay attention to. And you can get all these calendars and all this in the link in the description under this, as I always post this to Medium so that you can review and study it on your own. But yeah, I'd say June 27th is a very high probability relative to other dates. It happens to be the anniversary of the LGBTQ Pride Parade, the very first one in Chicago in 1970. And then June 28th is the anniversary of the assassination of Archduke that started World War I. So World War III, sudden destruction, starting at about the exact same time as World War I. History repeats itself. There is nothing new under the sun. And one last bit of trivia. Did anyone else notice that the big, beautiful bill looks like 666? Just random things that I saw that I thought I'd share just in case you guys are amused by it. I hope you enjoyed everything. Please leave comments about your theories, and I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, Lord willing, I'll see you.